Hello.
You may begin, ma'am.
All right, okay. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to the research program conducted by the Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka in association with Emerald Publishing and the Gulf Medical University, UAE. This is the second webinar of the Writing Impactful Research Program. Let me first welcome the speakers of the session, Professor Arosha Adikaram and Professor Tharusha Gooneratne from University of Colombo, Sri Lanka, with a great respect. Arosha Adikaram is a professor in Human Resource Management and currently the head of the Department of Human Resource Management at the Faculty of Management and Finance, University of Colombo. She was awarded one of the 10 outstanding young persons of the year 2010 by Junior Chamber International, Sri Lanka, and was also awarded the Pride of HR Award by the World Human Resource Development Congress in Mumbai in the same year. She was awarded the University of Colombo Vice Chancellor's Award for Research Excellence in Management and Finance in 2016 and 2018, and the Senate Award for Research Excellence in 2018 and the Commendation in 2019. She was also awarded the Best Paper Award at Best Paper Awards at several international research conferences. Professor Adikaram has been awarded research fellowships from International Labour Organization, Geneva, University of New South Wales, Canberra, Australia, and Sri Lanka Foundation. Tharusha Gooneratne is a professor in the Department of Accounting in the Faculty of Management and Finance of the University of Colombo and served as the head of the Department of Accounting. She was awarded the Aiken Spence Gold Medal for Management Accounting in BBA program and timely completion of thesis award for her PhD studies. She is also a fellow member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants and was awarded the BRD Silva Memorial Prize for the best performance in Sri Lanka in strategic financial management. She has published widely, both locally and internationally, and has been awarded for her research excellence. Some of her awards include Senate Award for Research Excellence in 2016, 2017, and 2018 by the University of Colombo. She has also been awarded the University of Colombo Vice Chancellor's Award for Research Excellence in Management and Finance in 2019 and the CIMA's Research Excellence Award in 2020. At the annual Emerald Literati Awards, her co-authored paper have won the Mary Parker Follett Award for outstanding paper published in accounting, auditing, accountability journal in 2013 and a highly commendable paper award in 2018. With the gratitude, let me also welcome Professor Thilini Gamage, Dean of the Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka, and Professor M.S.A. Maslam, Chairman of the Research and Publication Unit of the Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. Then, with the gratitude, let me welcome our regional coordinators of this webinar, Dr. Jayantha Dewasiri, Senior Lecturer, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka, and the Brand Ambassador of Emerald Publishing. Miss Sangeeta Menon, Publishing Relationship Manager, Emerald Publishing, Professor Sudhir Rana from Gulf Medical University, and Professor Kashif Said, Gift University, Pakistan. In fact, they supported a lot in making this program a great success. Then, with the gratitude, let me also welcome Ms. Disha Napal, Regional Marketing Manager, Emerald Publishing Group. With a great respect, I would also like to welcome all the distinguished participants from Emerald Publishing, Gulf Medical University, and the Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. At last, but not least, audience, mainly our academics from all the universities worldwide, including senior professors, senior lecturers, students, and researchers are warmly welcome to the program for making the session lively. Before summing it up, let me announce you the learning outcomes of this session. At the end of this session, participants will be able to describe ontology, epistemology and methodology, explain the commonly employed research paradigms, and identify the importance of being aware of where your research philosophy is located and knowing the philosophical stand of your research. Professor Arosha and Professor Tharusha, it's over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Tharusha, can you see the slides?
Yeah. Slides. No, I can't see the slide. I still see the same. Can you hear me?
1 minute.
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
We can see the slides now.
Yeah. Can you hear me also?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much to the organizers of this workshop series, and especially Dr. Jayantha Dewasiri for giving us this opportunity to share our understandings and learnings on research philosophy. So to keep up with the title of the presentation, we will start with the session outcomes. The first one would be to describe the key terms related to research philosophy, which includes ontology, epistemology, and methodology. Then, to explain the commonly employed research paradigms. And finally, to identify the importance of being aware of where your research is philosophically located and knowing the philosophical stance of your research. So as Socrates said, knowledge is always proportionate to the realm from which it is gained. Accordingly, in this session, we will try to offer insights on research philosophy and the alternative knowledge claims stemming from various research philosophical underpinnings. I think, sorry, we can't hear you, Arosha.
You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, ma'am. It says, could you please take your headphones out and put them again or something? There is some issue with your audio.
Yeah, okay, now I think I'm fine now.
Yeah, now we can hear.
So
We can hear. Yes.
Yeah, because we do the session concurrently, so sometimes the organizer unmutes me. So if it's good if I'm not unmuted, that will ensure smooth running of the session. So to move on, now you would most probably start your research with a research problem and then questions, and then you would move on to deciding what type of data you would be gathering. But really, if you look at the famous research onion of Saunders and colleagues, you would see that data collection and data analysis really comes in the middle of the onion. Before you make the choice of the techniques and procedures, there are many layers that you have to pass through. And the most outer layer of this onion, which is the philosophy, is where it all starts. So in reality, when you do your research, you have to first consciously or unconsciously have to decide where you are philosophically located. And this philosophical location of the research and yourself would really guide you through the other choices that you have to make in carrying out your research. So if I'm to show this in another way, you would generally see, if you take this iceberg, you would generally see this philosophical foundation, the philosophical underpinning of your research, the ontology, epistemology, and the methodology submerged in water. You would not really see it. In most instances, you would not at a glance see what the philosophical foundation is of a research, but it is submerged, and it is what would actually guide the methods, the analysis, the theory selection, and everything else in your research. And of course, you are asked to explicitly state your philosophical foundation also, but in many instances, it's sort of submerged in water, if you take the example of iceberg. So what is this philosophy? What we understand by philosophy that guides our whole research process. So to simply put, it's the assumptions about the world. It's how the world is seen, assumptions about the reality. And then it is also the assumptions about knowledge, what we call the epistemology. And then it's also assumptions about how we can best come to understand reality and knowledge. So philosophy actually, as I've been saying, it is what will guide you throughout your research. So sometimes you might really understand where you stand in terms of your understanding or your assumptions about reality, knowledge, and how you come to understand it. And then you will start developing your or terming or developing your research problem and your questions, and then the rest with that understanding of your philosophical foundation. Or in other instances, you would first develop your research problem and questions, and that would really indicate your stance in terms of the philosophy of your research. So either way, so consciously or unconsciously, your philosophy, your assumptions about reality, knowledge, and how you come to understand reality and knowledge will guide the whole research.
Next, we will look at why we need to understand the reason for philosophy to be important, or why philosophy is important. So if you really think about the day-to-day decisions that we make, our everyday decisions are in essence really affected by our beliefs, assumptions, etc. And of course, research is no exception. Therefore, the beliefs and assumptions that we hold have an impact on the research we do, as well as the methodology and the methods we deploy. So if you talk about the two of us, we being qualitative researchers with an interpretive and a social constructivist orientation, we believe in multiple subjective realities, and that knowledge can be subjectively acquired. So this worldview that we hold has influenced the kind of research we do, and also how we go about doing our research. So accordingly, all research is based on assumptions about the world, the reality, the knowledge, and how it is perceived, and how best you can come to really understand it. And as Hopper and Powell, way back in 1985, have said, there is actually no such thing as an totally objective or value-free investigation. So therefore, understanding research philosophies is really essential in carrying out your research, because sometimes it may be consciously, sometimes unconsciously, but actually at every stage of our research, we are in essence making certain philosophical assumptions. These assumptions really underpin your research, the strategy and the methods you select as part of that particular research design. The most important thing is therefore to ensure that there is a coherence in all the elements that all these elements, so that the research fits in well together. So accordingly, research philosophy underpins your research design. It really show why you are doing a research in a particular way, what methodology, what strategy of inquiry, analysis, and how you really go about writing up. Also, of further importance, why philosophy is important is it really guides the research problem, questions in terms of what you have posed, the research strategy you've selected, the data collection methods you have deployed, etc. So in all this shows the importance of research philosophy. But a very important thing to note at this stage is, although we say that all this is important, there is no single right or one best way. So if you go back to the era when business and management research emerged as an academic discipline in the 20th century, we can see that it has drawn theoretical bases from a mixture of disciplines. It may be social sciences such as sociology, psychology, economics, maybe natural sciences such as chemistry and biology, applied sciences, like engineering and statistics, humanities such as linguistics and history, and of course, the domain of organizational practice. So if you take all together, insights from these various disciplines have really led to the coexistence of such multiple philosophies, paradigms, approaches, methodologies, all that. Therefore, actually, rather than we singling out one as the best way, we can say that each philosophy and the paradigm has contributed something unique and valuable to the business and management research, and they in essence represent different ways of reality. Therefore, here we are with distinct traditions which operate with their own internally consistent set of choices.
So to show you how these different aspects linked together, how research philosophy, research paradigm, and methodology and methods linked together, we'll show you this figure. So research philosophy will guide the research paradigm that your study is based on. And the research paradigm will tell you what sort of methodology and a strategy of inquiry you need to adapt or employ. And that will inevitably tell you how your data collection should be carried out, what sort of data to collect, how you should analyze, and also how you should write up your study. So before we move on to these different steps, especially to the different research paradigms stemming from research philosophies, it's important that we understand the different ologies of the philosophy. So we talk about ontology, epistemology, and methodology. These are very commonly used terms, and it's important that we understand what each of these terms mean. So to start off with, we'll talk about ontology first. So ontology is about how one perceives the world and the reality. It's also about the assumptions we hold about the world, the truth, the nature of reality and its existence, and our beliefs about what sort of things exist in this world, what reality is, and how things come into being. So this might at a glance on the onset appear a little complicated for management researchers maybe, or researchers in other areas. But if I'm to give you examples from management, when you say how you perceive the world, it can be for us management researchers, how we see an organization, or how we see an organizational practice or a process, or how we see the organizational actors, employees, or the stakeholders. So this is the reality that we talk about when we discuss ontology. So people's perception or beliefs or assumptions about the world or the reality can be different. On one hand, there would be those who believe of an objective reality, which we call realism. So those who believe in an objective reality thinks what you get is what you see. So for them, reality is out there, independent of the individual, and it's tangible. They say that social entities exist external to social actors, and therefore the reality exists independent of those who live and what people may think or understand it to be. This is termed as the objective reality, and they believe in this one true reality that does not change. And opposite to that is the understanding of a subjective reality, where it is also known as idealism, which says what you say is what you see. So for them, reality is not really something that is independent of the individual, but it is what the individuals co-construct within themselves or with others in the society. They believe in multiple realities, and they believe that reality is subjective. It depends what is real to one person may not be so to another. And each individual will have their own imagination, their own understanding of what the world is and the objects and people in the world is. So they assume social phenomena are created from social actors' perceptions and consequent actions. So it is thus created subjectively, and it's a production of a person's mind. So these are the two extremes, extreme perceptions of what world is about, and of course a person can be placed in different places in this continuum between objective and the subjective perceptions about the world and the reality. And then if we look at epistemology, epistemology is the study of assumptions or study of assumptions of knowledge, what knowledge is, what kind of knowledge is possible, how would person get to know something or acquire knowledge, and what is the basis of true knowledge. It's the assumptions related to the nature, origin, limits, and acquisition of knowledge. Now that too can be looked at from extreme two perspectives. On one hand, you have the objective assumptions about knowledge, and on the other hand, you have the subjective assumptions about the knowledge. So these objective assumptions we call positivism. The subjective assumptions we call anti-positivism. We'll talk about these in more detail as we move on. But what they say is the objective assumptions is where they say this knowledge is something that you can observe and measure as it is, and once the reality is measured, it can be generalized. So they believe that you can statistically measure the knowledge, and you can also generalize this knowledge. And on the other side, subjective assumptions is where you believe that knowledge is not measurable, of course, because they believe in multiple realities. So for them, they understand that you cannot measure these multiple realities and you cannot generalize it because the reality is multiple. And they believe that you need to subjectively identify what these multiple realities are. Now, this might again sound a little complicated, so I'll bring in an example to show you how these subjective and objective viewpoints differ. So if you are interested in trying to find out the success of an entrepreneur, you want to find out how successful an entrepreneur is or how successful the entrepreneurs are. If you have objective assumptions, if you are onto the objective side, you would believe that by looking at most probably the profitability of the entrepreneur, you can look at his success. So in order to identify the success of the entrepreneur, you will look at the profitability, measure it, and you would look at few entrepreneurs and maybe then try to generalize it to a bigger sample, bigger population as well. But when you look at this from a subjective perspective, when you look at the success of an entrepreneur from a subjective perspective, you realize that success might mean different things to different entrepreneurs. It is not necessarily the profits that would determine whether an entrepreneur is successful or not. So sometimes entrepreneurs will look at the satisfaction they get out of the business as success, the amount of satisfaction that they get as the success, or the economic independence they get out of being an entrepreneur as success. There can be many definitions or interpretations of success that is different to different individuals. When you see entrepreneurship or success of entrepreneurship as that, you would have a subjective viewpoint. So this is the simplest way that I can differentiate between these objective and subjective views of ontology and epistemology. So if Tharusha can maybe explain a little bit more about how subjective and objective debate is explained by Morgan and Smirkic.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Can you move on to the next slide, please?
I have moved on, Tharusha. I mean, Smirkic and Morgan and Smirkic slide. Can't you see?
Waiting. Yeah, we'll wait a bit. Maybe there's some connection.
There seems to be a connectivity.
Slow connection or whatever, no?
Seems to be okay.
You can see that, is it?
Yes. Now you are clear. You should be able to see now.
Yeah, I still see epistemology. Will wait a bit.
Can you see now?
You can see, or?
Yes. Yes. You can explain, Tharusha. Maybe you can open your presentation and explain.
We'll wait a little. Yeah.
Ma'am, which slide do you want to see?
Yeah.
This slide 12.
Slide.
It may be taking a little
12.
time to load. So please reach that slide and just give it a few seconds.
Sorry, Miss Disha. I think we are able to
Yeah.
see the 12 number slide, subjective objective debate within social
Yeah,
science.
because we are able to see the subjective objective.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Sorry,
what Tharusha can't see. Tharusha,
Sorry,
maybe you can. Yeah. Can you open your one and do it, Tharusha? Otherwise, we'll be just taking time.
Yeah, give me a second, please. Yeah, give me a second, please. So shall I? Yeah, I will explain. I hope you can hear me, no?
Yes, can
So
hear.
continuing from the discussion on ontology and epistemology, we can say that within a particular research can be situated in a continuum of objectivism and subjectivism approach to social science. So if you look at this famous diagram, which shows the six-way classification as expressed by Morgan and Smirkic 1980, that actually captures this point. So if you look at from categories 1 to 6, they are in essence alternative ways of looking at the world. And if you look at one extreme, the subjectivist approach, that's at one end, and the other extreme is the objectivist approach. So if you look at the subjectivist approach, and in terms of ontologically, ontologically it shows that reality is seen as a projection of human imagination. So going by that, it really rejects the positivistic grounds on knowledge and emphasizes on the importance of understanding the way in which human beings really diverse worldviews. So that's one extreme. And if we move to the other, quite in contrast to the other extreme, which is the objectivist approach to social science, we can see that view totally as a concrete structure, and epistemologically it's linked to the positivistic science of knowledge. So these are the two extremes, and in this six-way classification, you may realize that there are so many other possibilities, a range of possibilities based on different worldviews. So for instance, if you look at the ontological assumptions from moving from subjectivist approach to the objectivist, I wonder whether you can hear me. Is it okay? Because there was an interruption just.
Yeah, can hear you.
Yes,
Yeah,
we
sorry,
can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So if we look at from moving from the subjectivist approach to the objectivist approach, from one extreme to the other, we can say there is a gradual move from viewing reality as a social, from the human imagination perspective to social construction, then to symbolic discourse, then as a reality as a contextual field of information, a concrete process, and concrete structure. Shall I see whether the next slide is visible?
Yeah,
or...
I put it on the methodology slide.
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yes, I can see it. Yeah, that's. I think yes. Give me a second. Give me a second, please. Yeah, I can see it. So, stemming from the ontological and epistemological assumptions that we just talked about, methodology is really about how we go about acquiring or finding knowledge. So it's about how you really go about and find knowledge. So in terms of this methodology, there are two main standpoints, which we are commonly known as quantitative and qualitative. However, we want to also stress at this point, methodology is not a very simple classification of quantitative and qualitative. Instead, there is much more to it. But for ease of understanding and clarity of explanation, at this point, we are keeping to this explanation. So moving on, if you look at the ontological belief of a single objective reality and the epistemological stance of positivism, invariably, you would look at knowledge to be gathered in an objective manner. So this would really lead you to resorting to do your study from a quantitative methodological perspective. So within this option, the researcher is considered as objective and independent, and as this diagram shows you, is an outside to the particular research. So it's taking an outsider perspective. Then on the other hand, if you look at ontological belief of subjective multiple realities and epistemological stance of anti-positivism, that knowledge should be subjectively gathered, invariably you would resort to a qualitative methodology. So in this scenario, the research is considered part and parcel of the research and kind of co-constructs the reality and taking a insider perspective. Can you move on to the next slide, please?
Can you see I've moved on?
Oh dear, still there seems to be, yes, can see, yeah. So continuing from our discussion on philosophy, this figure actually shows that there needs to be consistency between research philosophy, that means in terms of ontology, epistemology, and of course not only that, in terms of the which theoretical perspective that you adopt should also be in line with your philosophical underpinning. Then continuing from that, the methodology that you follow in terms of what procedures that we can use to acquire knowledge, as well as more specific decisions in terms of that method, in terms of the particular tools and sources of data collection, all should really flow from that decision. So if you take a small example, if you hold a subjectivist view in terms of what reality is, then you need to be internally consistent. Therefore, epistemologically as well, you have to follow a similar worldview. That is, your knowledge cannot be quantitatively measured and statistically generalized. Instead, you need to look at how multiple realities need to be subjectively identified and captured, keeping with this subjective stance that you hold. And then in terms of, if you move on in terms of the data collection, maybe rather than administering a questionnaire, you may wish to do in-depth interviews and capture the ground realities, in-depth perspectives of the key actors. And then moving on in terms of, sorry.
Professor Tharusha, I'm so sorry to stop you. May I request you to switch
No
off your
problem.
video? Because I am getting a lot of messages from people that your voice is not clear. So maybe if you switch off your video, maybe the bandwidth will be a little better, and it may help with the voice.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Better
Sorry
to
about
switch
that.
off.
I thought the
No,
connection
that's all
would be
right.
okay
That's all
at
right.
this
If we can just
location.
switch off their webcam, maybe it will help us. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about the interruptions. Yeah. Because I thought this location would be okay. That's why I came here. Yeah. Yes. So is it clear now, or is it better?
Yes, that is better now. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Right. So in terms of data collection, and if we move on in terms of data analysis as well, particularly the theoretical orientation the theory that you lean on to make sense of your data also should follow from the particular ontological, epistemological assumptions that you carry with the particular research. So the most important point that we want to stress through this slide is the need for internal consistency between your philosophical assumptions, methodology, and of course, stemming from that, the methods and sources of data.
So to move on, so we've talked about research philosophy, about ontology, epistemology, and how it should link to methodology, data collection, all of that, as previously said by Tharusha. But before you move on to methodology and data collection and analysis, you also need to understand your research paradigm. So I'm showing the figure again to show you where research paradigms is situated. So a research paradigm is different ways of looking at the world, reality, and knowledge. It is a shared philosophical assumptions, beliefs, and agreements that lead to different paradigms. So a researcher can be founded on a specific research paradigm or a theoretical, ontological, and epistemological position based on the assumptions the person holds. And based on this ontological, epistemological positioning of the person will be in a particular research paradigm. So a research paradigm is also the point from which a researcher would view his or her research. So I'm coming back to Morgan and Smirkich, show you how a research paradigm will come into being. So as it's shown in this graph, you can see that you have the subjectivist approach and the objectivist approach. So there would be certain researchers who believe in the reality as a projection of human imagination and think that you can obtain phenomenological insights and revelation. And those who have these specific ontological and epistemological assumptions would be in a particular research paradigm. Then if a researcher has the ontological assumption that reality as a realm of symbolic discourse, and the basic epistemological stance to understand patterns, of symbolic discourse, the person would then be in another research paradigm. And then moving on like that, when you go to the far corner of the objectivist approach, there would be researchers who share the belief that reality has a concrete structure, and they would belong to another research paradigm. So when you are placed in different places in this continuum, you will belong to different paradigms. So that's how the paradigms come into being. We will explain more about this, and Tharusha will talk about, start the discussion with Burrell and Morgan's research paradigms. Tharusha?
Yeah. Numerous scholars, I hope you can hear, no?
Yes.
Yeah, numerous scholars have expressed various insights on paradigms. So out of them, the classification that has been put forward by Burrell and Morgan way back in 1979 is very popular, and it has been lot talked about. And this involves, as you can see through the diagram here, 4 paradigms through functionalist, interpretive, radical humanist, and radical structurist. So through a 2x2 matrix. So as you can see in this figure, it has 2 dimensions in terms of assumptions. One is assumptions about the nature of science, that is whether it to be subjective or objective. So subjective, I think we've touched upon these terms earlier as well, and we will continue to do so. So subjective implies that we could be looking at multiple subjective realities, and in the case of objective, that we are looking at a single objective reality. Then flowing from that, there would be, on the other hand, assumptions about the nature of society, whether you view the society to be regulated or to be of radical change. So this is called as sociology of regulation and sociology of radical change. Then, as the word regulation would imply, and in line with the general idea of it, sociology of regulation is concerned with the status quo, maintaining the status quo, maintaining social order, consensus, compliance, social integration. So with such an orientation from an organization perspective, maybe you're trying to look at improving organizational performance, etc., within the current setup, system, framework, with the existing rules, regulations, etc. Then, on the other hand, sociology of radical change is concerned with understanding change, maybe conflict, modes of domination, contradiction, etc. So this would also mean that we are looking at research which fundamentally question how really things are done in organizations, and really strive to offer insights to change organizational as well as social world. So if you really look at the 4 paradigms based on these ideas, they in essence define fundamentally different perspectives for the analysis of social phenomena. So though these are in effect alternative views, as you can see through 4 boxes, they are really views about the social world regarding how you look at the nature of science as well as how you look at the nature of society. So if one is to be, or if a particular research is to be located in a particular paradigm, let it be functionalist, interpretive, radical humanist, or radical structuralist, it is to view the world in a particular way. So we will now very briefly have a look at each of these terms in a little more detail, just to give a better insights to it. And if you take the first one, the functionalist, you can see it's falling within the objective and social regulation quadrants. So it is very much the paradigm which we usually see in business and management research mostly, and it is looking at organizations as rational entities. So coming from the objective and regulation perspective, look at organization as rational entities and being highly rooted in sociology of regulation. So with the perspective on rationality, you look at subject matter also from an objective perspective. Flowing from that, the aim is to provide explanation on the status quo, maybe social order, consensus, social integration, etc. And it is keeping with all this, it is underpinned by positivism. So this is one of the very common paradigms that we see in management research. Moving on to the next one, if you look at interpretive, it does share some similarity with functionalist paradigm because it is still within the sociology of regulation. But of further importance, it is different because it approaches subject matter from a subjective point of view, trying to capture the subjective experiences. So to tell a little bit more about it, maybe you're trying to see how humans attempt to make sense of the world around them, like what's going on in an organization, why it is happening in that manner, why certain people agree to something and why others, and why do people hold different views, etc. So stemming from that, you also strive to identify irrationalities as well, as opposed to rationalities under the functionalist paradigm. So this the approach to social science in this takes an anti-positivistic step. If we are to move on to the other 2 quadrants very briefly, you can see that radical humanist is placed within subjectivism as well as radical change. So in that case, it's really concerned in developing a sociology of radical change from a subjectivist perspective. So the approach to social science is subjective. So in contrast to accepting the status quo, in this you kind of critique the status quo, emphasize on change, explore conflicts, explore domination, and try to attempt to change the status quo, what's going, the current status, etc.
Professor Gone.
Sorry.
So sorry to interrupt
Still
you.
not clear.
I am no. I am receiving messages that are we on the slide that you are explaining? I just wanted to confirm.
Paradigm. Yes. Actually, what I'm doing is the 4 quadrants. I'm trying to go a bit into each of them.
Right. Perfect. Not a problem at all.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Sure.
Yeah. So there are these 4 quadrants. Earlier we talked, initially what I talked was about in general about this Burrell and Mogul's framework. Then a little bit about each of them, moving from functionalist to interpretive to radical humanist, and now to radical structuralist. So if you take the radical structuralist perspective or the paradigm, it combines objectivist ideas and the sociology of radical change. So it really emphasizes structural conflicts, modes of structural domination. Maybe it's happening in organization through hierarchies and maybe through reporting relationships. These are things that gets captured. And also it strives to generate radical change through certain political, economic crises, etc. And this research attempts to achieve a fundamental change based on the analysis of particular organizational phenomena, focusing on structural power relationships, the nature and patterns of conflicts, etc. And it is taking a critical realist perspective as well. So to continue from this, while this is one particular framework, we need to really stress at this point, this is only one classification. Of course, there are many alternative classifications about paradigms, and different researchers, writers, scholars, they have come up with alternative explanations, classifications. So it's very important to be very cautious and be reflective when you're reading about research philosophy and paradigms. It's something we want to emphasize. And also note that due to their interconnectedness, these different terms, philosophy, paradigm, methodology, approach, strategy, etc., are at times used interchangeably, and sometimes you may realize that the distinctions between them are not very clear, somewhat blurred as well.
And also to clarify how research paradigms, so sometimes you might now be a little confused as what all of this is about. So with stemming from your ontological and epistemological and methodological assumptions, you would now you would now decide what sort of research questions, problems you want to pose. Or if you already have a research problem or research questions, now you would understand what paradigm it belongs to. Certain questions would be more suitable to be studied under certain paradigms, given its ontological and epistemological assumptions, and certain other research problems and questions will be more suitable to be studied under certain other paradigms, again given the ontological and epistemological underpinning. So if you believe in an objective reality, a reality that is out there, you cannot really do an interpretive study. Interpretive itself tells you that you believe in multiple realities and you believe in a subjective capturing of those multiple realities. So that's why it's important that you understand what type of a study you are interested in doing, or what type of a study that you have started doing, and then you need to very carefully reflect on your assumptions when you thought of this research problem, when you thought of the questions. What were your assumptions about what you are studying? What were your assumptions about the development of knowledge? So you need to very carefully think of those. You have to reflect about your own beliefs and the beliefs that led to a particular research problem to be decided, to be studied. And this is important, as Tharusha also said, because everything else, all the other decisions that you make about your research, your strategy of inquiry, your data, the type of data that you'll be collecting, data collection, and your role in this as a researcher, all of these decisions will depend on your research paradigm. And of course, the research paradigm depends on the research philosophy. So research philosophy takes you to the paradigm, a particular paradigm, and that paradigm will tells you how you should proceed with your research, what choices you need to make. I hope we made that clearer for you. So your assumptions about ontology and epistemology and methodology and your understanding of paradigms shape your research project in terms of how you formulate your research questions and the rest of the decisions that you make. So as I said, the philosophy guides your paradigm and the paradigm guides the rest of it. So we have some commonly discussed paradigm, and Tharusha will brief you on that, and we will move on to each of those as we move on.
Yes. So as we said, there are many classifications, many alternative ways of looking at this, but we picked some commonly discussed paradigms, and we are trying to give a brief overview of each of them, and then to use give some examples of their use as well. So mainly we talk about positivism, which is the most used paradigm probably. Then of course post-positivism, followed by that interpretivism, social constructivism, and pragmatism. So each one we will go into a bit more detail and explain a bit more. Okay, first turning to positivism. So it really refers to what is posited, positivism. So what is posited and what is basically given. So that's from where this has come through. So this particular paradigm believes in a single objective reality that's independent of the human. So you look at it as a single objective reality, and which is being really interpreted through social conditioning.
This is what we call the positive, the objective viewpoint when we discuss ontology and epistemology.
So it believes that knowledge can be discovered objectively and explained as it is. So you can clearly discover and you can explain as it is. So in doing so, positivist researchers often use statistics and involves measurements, and they are certainly guided by theory and about hypotheses relating to the presumed relationships. So we can elaborate this a little bit more through a table. So relating this same point to the table, if you look at ontologically, a positivistic researcher believes in a reality that is external, objective, and independent from the social actors. So that's why initially as well we were saying that researcher is taking an outside perspective and believes that this reality can be apprehended as it is and that it can be measured and known. So as it is, you can really gather this, that's the idea. And epistemologically, the belief underlying positivism is that reality can be actually and accurately identified and explained, and only what is observable. If you can observe something, then that's really the credible data and facts. So you really go by what's observable, what you can really see. A particular feature of this paradigm is that the knowledge is really, in that sense, objectively obtained, and you can really generalize to a larger context. So we commonly talk about generalization, and that becomes very much relevant to the positivism paradigm. So in line with that, the aims or the goals of this kind of studies strives to measure and objectively identify reality through a very structured process. A structured process, and then primarily they use statistics and measurements, and typically flowing from that involves quantitative analysis of the data, and the view, and that's a view with, and finally with a view to make statistical generalization. So making statistical generalization becomes a very important thing here, because you are you're looking at a objective reality using statistical data, and through quantitative analysis you are striving for statistical generalization. So flowing from these explanations, understandably the methodology is more of a quantitative methodology, and connected to that, it would often involve hypothesis testing, concepts and variables being operationalized for measurement, as well as the use of probability sampling with the adequate sample size. So the sample size, etc., becomes a very important point here, because the aim is towards generalization of the findings. Moving on, if we look at the role of the researcher, based on this explanation, we can see that the research is considered to be independent of the data and should be an objective collector as well as an analyzer of that data. So in that sense, we consider that the researcher takes an outside perspective. So continuing from these reasoning and explanation, the typical type of research problems and questions that would be raised would include possibly looking at causal relationship between variables, effect of one variable on another, then particular what are the factors probably leading to a particular outcome, etc. So these are the kind of questions that would be very often looked at from a positivism research. And to relate this with an example, we have drawn from a publication of two of our colleagues. The title of the article is "The Interaction Effect of Organizational Practices and Employee Values on Knowledge Management Success." So this, which has been published in the Journal of Knowledge Management. And as you can see through the slide, the purpose of this paper is to examine the interaction effect of organizational practices and values of employees on knowledge management success in organizations. So it's in essence examining the effect of one over the other. So you're kind of looking at the effect of one over the other. So from a methodological point of view, it is quantitative, and data has been collected through an online survey covering over 200 employees across various industries in Sri Lanka. And keeping with this data collection method, data has been analyzed also quantitatively using partial least squares. So you could see now how, flowing from the purpose of the research, the data collection, analysis, all that is matching and in line with each other, as well as keeping with the positivist paradigm.
Okay, so moving on, we'll talk about post-positivism. So that had really evolved from the positivist paradigm, but there are differences, and it had moved from positivism, but there are a lot of similarities also there to positivism. So post-positivists believe in an objective reality similar to positivists that is independent of human thought and beliefs, and they also believe in generalizability. But they believe, unlike the positivists who believe that things can be known, the reality can be known as it is, that it can be observed and measured as it is, post-positivists believe that everything is not completely normal, that you cannot really understand or identify or measure the reality as it is, and that reality can be known only imperfectly and probabilistically. So they do not only, the place where they differ from positivism is where they believe that the reality cannot be completely normal and reality can only be known imperfectly and probabilistically. And another difference between positivism and post-positivism is where they believe that reality is interpreted through social conditioning. This is what the post-positivists believe, that reality is interpreted through social conditioning, and admits that knowledge is a result of social conditioning. And to capture knowledge, or to get the knowledge, they believe in both quantitative and qualitative methodology. So to again explain this in more detail with the table. So in ontology, under ontology, the beliefs about assumptions about reality is that post-positivists believe in an objective reality that is independent of human thought and interpreted through social conditioning, and believes that this reality cannot be apprehended as it is and can be apprehended only imperfectly. And in terms of their assumptions about knowledge, they believe that it is impossible to fully explain the reality, and that only what is observable can provide credible data and facts. They don't believe that everything can be observable. And they also focuses on explaining within a context and condition, but they also believe in generalizability similar to positivism, but admits that knowledge is a result of social conditioning. So the aims and goals of post-positivism would be to measure and objectively identify a probable reality through a structured process, but they also use statistics and measurements, and they also are concerned about generalizability to a greater extent. They also they use qualitative and quantitative, as I mentioned earlier, but might be more towards quantitative methods, but they might use qualitative research as well. And we have seen some qualitative researchers who are in this post-positivist paradigm. Generally, when we see researchers who use propositions and they test propositions, not hypotheses, but they start their study with propositions where they have maybe conceptual frameworks when they start their study, or when they move on with their study. We believe that those are more post-positivist studies rather than interpretive or social constructionist, because there is that belief that there is an objective reality. That's why you do have these propositions, and they would also be believing in statistics and measurability. And when it comes to the role of the researcher, there is again a difference between positivist and post-positivist there, where post-positivists accept that the researcher is value-laden, that the researcher is also unbiased by the upbringing of the researcher, by the researcher's experience and the worldview. This is not something the positivists believe in. They don't talk about the researcher's biases and value-laden upbringing and all of that. But post-positivists believe that the researcher is value-laden, and there can be biasness that enter a research, but then they are very concerned about keeping those biases aside and seeing the world as it is. So the objective researcher perspective, the objective person who sits outside and looks into the field, looks into organizations, looks into people, is what they believe in. And while they accept that biases can be there, they strongly believe that you need to put aside those biases when you enter the field. And as I said, the researcher takes an outsider perspective without the biases. And the type of research problems and questions raised again would be where they might look at causal relationship, what is the effect on X on Y, but they move beyond that a little, where they would also look at why is X affecting Y, and what is the reason for this relationship. So they move a little ahead to look at certain aspects that the positivists don't look at. They also ask why and what questions, and this is maybe because of their understanding or because of their acceptance of social conditioning. So move on to interpretivism.
Yeah, I think my connection has improved. So is it clear? Because I on
yes,
the camera on.
clear.
Yes, because I realized that there was a yeah. So, yeah. So turning to interpretivism, interpretivism believes in emergent multiple subjective realities or subjective truths that may change over time. So such a philosophy paradigm looks at knowledge from a very subjective perspective, and that knowledge is subjectively created with social actors through their interactions. So seeing from the worldview of multiple social actors, such research attempts to identify the reality through the subjective meanings that people attach to it. Therefore, reality is believed to be within the individual or is co-constructed by individuals. So with this multiple perspective, the core idea is to really obtain an in-depth understanding. So in order to obtain this in-depth understanding, interpretivism very often relies on qualitative methodology. So to elaborate this further through the table, if you look at it, from an ontological perspective, interpretivist researchers believe in multiple subjective realities that may change. So we don't say that one perspective, one view is correct. Instead, from the worldview of different people, you look at their reality from their own worldview. So continuing from that, if we look at epistemologically, they believe that knowledge is subjectively created with the social actors through their interactions, as well as that reality can be really understood. Accordingly, the aim is to really identify reality through the subjective meanings that people attach, rather than labeling one particular view as correct, to really identify meaning behind the particular subjective views. If you look at the aims and goals of such research, interpretivism research, it's basically to uncover the insider perspectives, the meanings, and the different experiences that multiple actors associate to a particular practice, process, etc. And of course, they are in this type of research, one of the main aims is to get an in-depth or very detailed information. So in par with this explanation from a methodological stance, this type of research leans on qualitative methodology. Also, if we move on and look at how the researcher gets involved in the process, and when it comes to the role of the researcher, it's believed that the researcher is part of what's being studied and is co-constructing reality and taking a subjective stance. Flowing from these ontological, epistemological, methodological beliefs, the typical research problems or questions that could be explored using this paradigm would be things like what's really going on here, what's happening, why is it happening, why are some people saying so, why aren't others, what are the experiences, etc. So we'll try to relate this further with an example. And we have drawn from two of our own publications to explain this further. The first one is the fate of the balanced scorecard, alternative problematization and competing networks, which has been published in Qualitative Research in Accounting and Management. It's still just been published, so it is ahead of print. And if you look at the purpose, this study is really trying to investigate into the fate of the balanced scorecard approach in a particular organization. let me something. Okay. So it is trying to in detail to that particular context in terms of the particular balance scorecard project. And from a methodological perspective, it is following the qualitative methodology and case study approach to see how different actors have really built a competing network to gain support for their rationale to replace the balance scorecard, and then alternatively come up with a budgetary control system. So the data has been collected through in-depth interviews across people in different hierarchical levels, functional areas, etc. And of course, the interview data has been the main method of data collection, supplemented by observations and archival records. More importantly, if you look at this from more subjective and multiple reality perspective, the fact that interviews were conducted with people in different roles, hierarchical levels and functional areas, that has really enabled in gaining this different worldviews, multiple alternative ways of looking at it, multiple truths, the different meanings they attach to the technique, all that has been able to really grasp because the different levels and people have been interviewed. And keeping with this methodological orientation, the study has been leaning on actor network theory, which is a suitable theoretical lens given the nature of the inquiry as well as the methodological orientation of the study.
For this next example is one of mine with a colleague of mine, Professor Kailasapati. So here what we wanted to look at was how human resource professionals, human resource management professionals resolve complaints of sexual harassment. Having a philosophical background, ontological, epistemological assumptions, more towards interpretive social constructionist side of the continuum, the subjective side of the continuum, I am always interested to understand the different experiences of people, how people think of things differently, how they experience things differently, how they perceive things differently, how they behave differently. So I have always been interested in understanding these multiple realities. So therein we realized that how human resource professionals handle the complaints they get of sexual harassment is important to understand how effective in a way they resolve complaints and how this leads to prevention and handling of complaints, handling of sexual harassment in organizations. So we were interested to understand the decision-making styles, how different human resource professionals make different decisions, what sort of decisions they make, why they make certain decisions, what influences their decisions, and to see what really is most effective in terms of handling complaints. So we were mainly concerned about the different decision-making styles. Again, for us, effectiveness, we didn't look at it from one reality that is out there. There is one way of looking at effectiveness. Effectiveness, we understand, again, will have multiple meaning. How effective it is, how effective a complaint is handled would have different meaning to human resource professionals, to the victim, to the perpetrator. So we've understood that as well, and we've looked at the effectiveness from this multiple perspective, multiple realities perspective, rather than this one effective way, this one reality perspective. So for that, we've used qualitative research approach with where we conducted semi-structured in-depth interviews with 35 human resource professionals in 30 companies. So I suppose these two would tell you how interpretive, when you use interpretive paradigm, what sort of research questions problems you would come up with, and how you would go about solving those research problems. And then social constructionism. Sometimes interpretivism and social constructivism is spoken together synonymously or interchangeably, but they do have slightly different meanings. Social constructivists believe that, again, there are multiple realities similar to interpretivists, that reality is socially constructed. And we especially highlight social constructivists, especially understand that knowledge is constructed through interactions with others. So they are mainly interested in understanding how this social construction takes place, how people create meaning, how they construct meaning individually within a society and also as a group within the society, how they make construct meaning is what most interests the social constructivist. So here, social constructivists also believe that the researcher is integral to the study and that the researcher will co-construct the knowledge with the study participants. And reality is constructed by humans in their minds, which change with time and context. So this is another difference, another fact that you need to remember. Where we believe, social constructivists believe that this reality, these multiple realities also changes over time. So they are also not constant. They change over time and context. What is real to me now will not be so to me in another minute and also in another context. How I act, how I behave in my home would obviously be different to how I act and behave in another setting. And maybe how I look at things in the morning might be different to how I look at things in the afternoon. So it's every minute, every second, your reality, your meaning, your understanding of the world changes. This is another assumption of social constructivists. So it will help you to understand. So the researchers, social constructivists, will try to understand how meaning is socially constructed, and inevitably they will use qualitative research methodology. You cannot use a quantitative methodology to understand how meaning is constructed. So as I've been saying, ontology is where we believe that there are multiple realities which are time and context bound and projection of human imagination. That is, realities are constructed by humans in their mind, which changes with time and context. In terms of the assumptions about knowledge, it's believed that knowledge is constructed and subjectively identified through insights and revelation, and believes that reality can be constructed. And the aim, of course, is to understand how meaning is socially constructed. And the role of the researcher there is believed to be that where the researcher is an integral part of the study, and researcher gets involved with the participants to co-construct the knowledge, the values and beliefs of the researcher and the researcher's experiences would also come into the study when the meaning is constructed. So the type of research problems and questions raised would be to look at how meaning is constructed and simply to understand what is going on here. So to show that, to elaborate that with another example, I'll take from this research of mine published in 2016. So again, looking at sexual harassment, that's my main area of research interest. So most of my publications are in that. So in sexual harassment, we believe that that not everybody who experience the behaviors that we generally understand as sexual harassment would label those behaviors as sexual harassment. Now, this non-labeling can be, of course, due to many reasons. It can be because they are not knowledgeable, because they are not aware as to what constitutes sexual harassment, or because they are embarrassed, because they don't want to be seen as a victim. So there can be many reasons for people to, especially women, to not label their experiences as sexual harassment. But then in this study, we found out we wanted to look at how social construction of the meaning of sexual harassment and how a person is socialized and how the norms and values of the society is internalized in a person, and how that is brought into this labeling of sexual harassment. So we understood how females are brought up, where expressing sexuality is subjugated, or we are not encouraged to express sexuality. We are not encouraged to even use the terms sex and sexuality in the society. If women do that, they are considered as immoral, disrespectful. Therefore, women have internalized that using these terms even is not proper. So when they are afraid to use these terms, they would not be labeling their experience as sexual, because the term sexual they are not willing to use. Therefore, they might not be willing to label their experience as such. So we propose that as another explanation for non-labeling. To do that, we used in-depth one-on-one interviews with 40 working women. So here I was looking at the social construction of the reality, or in other words, I was looking at how females construct meaning about sexuality, sexual harassment, and in turn their experiences. So then now if you look at the paradigms that we have spoken so far, you could see how we have moved from the objectivist corner to the subjectivist corner of the continuum we showed you earlier. So we've shown you how positivism is more towards the objectivist viewpoint. And then when we we've slowly moved on from positivism to interpretivism to social constructionism to the other corner of the continuum, where we've looked at the total subjective viewpoint of looking at reality and knowledge. Now, the other paradigm that we are going to discuss, which is commonly used now, is it's really difficult to be placed in these different places of the continuum, but it's something, as I said, that is commonly used. It's the pragmatism. So in pragmatism, pragmatists believe that there is no one best way of knowing the reality or what the reality is. So for most part, pragmatists avoid the use of concepts such as truth and reality. They are not really concerned about what their ontology, epistemology is, and they really don't believe in one ontology or epistemology, or a particular ontology or epistemology. They believe that reality can both be subjective and objective. They believe that sometimes there can be this one single real world, and they also believe that all individuals have their own unique interpretations of the world. So they are sort of free to use whatever the methodology that they prefer to use, and they generally use mixed methodology. So pragmatists would adopt both subjective and objective stance depending on the research question. So they are really interested in the research question, and depending on the research question, they would decide whether it's going to be subjective or objective stance that they are using. So when we look at the table, as we've been doing so for the other paradigms, so ontology is where pragmatists assume that there is no single real world, and that all individuals have their unique interpretations of the world. And they assume that there is no one best way of knowing how the reality exists, and that reality can be both subjective and objectively known. So their goal is to answer the varied qualitative and quantitative research questions. So they would have both subjective and objective type of questions, and to address a research problem in both depth and breadth. And of course, they'll be using, as I said, the mixed methodology, and the role of the researcher would be both objective and subjective depending on the type of questions that are raised. And the type of research problems raised would be rather complex, and therefore some research questions would require in-depth exploration, whereas some would require quantification. So they might also look at causal relationship, and then they would also look at why that's happening, and they would have both the quantitative and qualitative type of questions in pragmatism. So pragmatists is free to study what interests them and is of value to them, and study it in different ways that they deem appropriate, and utilize the results in ways that can bring about positive consequences within their value system. So we've been discussing about these different paradigms, but specific paradigms that we believe are commonly used, at least in management. But there are these other paradigms as well.
Yeah. So these various other paradigms that are listed here on the slide are some of the other things we can think about. Of course, we can add much more to the list. And these particular paradigms may be linked to particular theories, their own particular methodologies, etc., in line with the particular assumptions that they underpin. However, in the interest of time, we will not be really going into detail of all this because we would rather focus on trying to summarize our discussion and focus on the points, the key points that we were talking about in our presentation.
So before we move on to the summary and points to ponder, I would like to emphasize that you would have realized from the discussion that we've had for the last 1.5 hours or so that you cannot just simply decide on a data collection method or a methodology or an analysis technique or even the research problem or how you word the research problem. You cannot just simply decide that. And you cannot just simply because you have a qualitative methodology or simply because you collect data through interviews, you cannot say that it's an interpretive study or that it's a qualitative study. To decide what your research paradigm is, you really need to understand the underlying assumptions about ontology and epistemology. So it's not a simple way of looking at how you collect data or how you term your research problem and deciding whether it's a positivist study, post-positivist and interpretive or social constructionist study or a pragmatist study. There is a lot more, as we've discussed, a lot deeper discussion that underpins all your decisions. So if you have been doing research or have taken the decisions about research unconsciously, maybe now you can start thinking of making conscious decisions as to how you proceed with your research. So Tharusha?
Yes, right. Continuing from Arosha's points, of course, any research is certainly based on a set of assumptions and underpinning philosophical beliefs. So these beliefs, as we've been talking about in the past 1.5 hours, these beliefs are about the social world or the reality, as we call ontology, the nature of knowledge or epistemology, how we are going to obtain that knowledge, gather that knowledge, which is methodology, as well as the research strategy and the methods of data collection, etc., that we select as part of that strategy. So very importantly, these concepts are highly interrelated and depend on each other. We've been stressing this point, I think, throughout the session. So understandably, for your research, the starting point would be your research problem and questions. So that would, in essence, reflect your research philosophy. So your research problem would, in essence, reflect your research philosophy. And this research philosophy, continuing from that, the research philosophy would really guide your paradigm, and the paradigm would really guide the entire research process. Given this link, it's very important from the outset for you to understand where and why your study is located from a philosophical point of view, And you should really be able to defend your position very strongly. That's how you could really show the credibility of your research. Because when we research, we always say we need to justify and defend our position. So as a means of defending and justifying in terms of philosophy also, that applies equally like into other areas of your research. Yeah. If we move on, we have to remember that a well thought out and a consistent set of assumptions would really constitute a credible research philosophy. So you need to be upfront, explicit about your philosophical base. And of course, you need to be aware of the alternative philosophical underpinnings as well. Why we are saying this, and we are actually stressing this, because as we earlier told as well, there is no one right or wrong paradigm. So you can ground your research, your inquiry in different paradigms depending on the nature of the study, stemming from the research problem, questions. And also, we have to be very careful to be philosophically open-minded. Because rather than attempting to kind of assume a particular philosophical base as superior or to elevate one over the other, we need to really understand them as alternatives and realize and acknowledge the fact that they are suitable for different studies. So we again go with the idea that you don't have one correct way. Instead, these are alternatives, different worldviews that researchers could have. Also, we need to remember it's important to be very mindful of the different terms and terminologies. As we earlier said as well, you read various books, articles, you do searches, whatever the case may be, you may come up with different classifications, interpretations, etc. And very often terms like philosophy, paradigm, methodology, all that tends to be somewhat interchangeably used, and clear boundaries between these various terms are somewhat not clear-cut as well. So as researchers, we need to be very open-minded and be reflexive and be cautious about these alternative views and different ways and the multiple interpretations and multiple classifications that research philosophy in essence may have.
Yes, so with that, we come to the end of our session. And we hope that you got at least a broad understanding of what philosophy is and how you we hope that you understood the different philosophical stances researchers would have, and maybe use this understanding and knowledge in the future in some way. And it had been a pleasure to have been with you all, and I'm sure you would have some questions. So over to the organizer.
Yes, there are quite a lot of questions here, and I'm going to speak them out. And the first question is for Professor Tharusha. The person says, "Ma'am, can you please give examples of some research if it had to do with a subjective approach?" Reference slide number 22.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Well, this is not the subjective.
Maybe it's about the objectivism. No, yes. So
yes.
This is this study is actually earlier slide, no, Arosha?
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to show the example for the subjective side.
I don't know whether the person was asking about the earlier one, no, or subjectivism.
No, so the question is, ma'am, the question is that they would like some examples of research if it had been done with a subjective approach.
Okay. Then I think it's the other slide. Yeah. If you could please move to the earlier one, please, Arosha. No, yeah. So can I elaborate a bit more, and after Arosha also can tell some? Yeah.
Maybe there is nothing much to elaborate. It's just that whatever you, nothing to elaborate on the examples. If I think we very carefully showed you, type of research problems and questions raised. Maybe if you are looking at what is happening, why is something happening, what are the experiences, things like that would be more the subjective type of questions. But if you are looking at a causal relationship, it will be the objective questions that you are raising. Isn't it, Tharusha?
Yeah, maybe to add a bit more, I suppose the person wants to see some examples of studies, I guess. That's what I think he was asking about, some studies maybe, because predominantly we see a lot of more quantitative bent studies with an objective focus. So that may be the training the person is coming from. So we look at this as a more alternative. So the difference here is when you do have, it's really the methodology depends on your research questions. So you have to be very careful to see, as Arosha said, depending on the research questions to select your methodology. Now in this scenario, if you take this example, we were trying to understand the multiple perspectives, different people across different hierarchies, from top management to middle to the lower levels, across different locations, head office, regional branches, different functions, marketing, HR, etc. So how they view a particular phenomenon. So if you want to get such multiple perspective on a particular phenomena, you can't kind of say one person's view is correct. Instead, it is the worldview from different persons' view. That is where the subjectivities of different worldviews come to place. So the subjectivity, in the sense, those individual views, individual perspectives, opinions, the meanings they attach is very subjective. So rather than saying one is correct or not, we say that reality, it is a multiple reality based on the worldview of different actors. So if you want to read a bit more on this, I just can say I understood maybe he or she wants to know more readings. One journal also, again, Emerald Journal, Qualitative Research in Accounting and Management, being a journal which is more focused on qualitative research, you may be able to get more insights on generally management research done with such a orientation, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Now, another question is, how important is it to mention about ontology and epistemology in a research paper along with the methodology?
Can I answer that, and maybe you can add to that?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Maybe in a paper, a research paper, you might not go into detail about ontology and epistemology, but the way you term your research problem, the way that you have selected, made the decisions about the research process, that itself would tell the reader what type of ontological, epistemological assumptions you have. But then again, there are certain types of research papers that would require you to go into detail about the ontology and epistemology, but it will purely depend on the type of research problem that you are trying to address in that particular paper. If not, in a research paper, you might not need to explain in detail, but simply stating that it's an interpretive study or a social constructivist study or a positivist study might be sufficient. But if it's a master's or a PhD thesis that we are talking about, then of course you will have to in detail explain what your ontological and epistemological assumptions are.
Yeah. Can I add a bit more to that?
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, when it's a paper, you may be really working on a tight word limit as well. So you need to be cautious about that. Therefore, as Arosha very correctly said, maybe in a thesis you go detail into it, but in a paper, the reader has to get a clue and see the consistency of your philosophical assumptions and the methodology, strategy of inquiry. So that link and the consistency should be evident, but not to go in detail about each of these terms and the stance that you're taking, I feel.
And also sometimes you might have to explain, especially if it's an interpretive or social constructionist study, you might have to explain a little more about the researcher's role in the study, sort of as a reflective part. That again will of course depend on the journal, the reviewers, the editors, and the type of research problem and questions you are raising in the study. But in certain studies, you do need to explain a little bit about your stance, how you entered the study, with whether you have, co-constructed with the co-constructed the meaning with the participants, you have been, you have brought in your experiences into it, what sort of experiences, those sort of things you might have to explain in the paper, depending on the type of paper and the journal and all of that.
Thank you. The next question is, someone has asked, can you suggest a single book that discusses all of these paradigms?
Can I tell a few things and then Arosha can, yeah. I mean, there are various books on research methodology, and in our reference also we've included some few articles and books. Of course, Saunders' book, Saunders and others, they've done a book which is relating to business research, which does cover, it's quite encompassing, as well as Barbie and few others have done like that. There are various books. So while all these are there, you need to, don't think that this is the only thing. So just be open-minded, as we said. These are all good for you to read and broaden your horizon, understand the alternative explanations. But for your particular study, really see what is the explanation you want to go with. But reading widely certainly helps. So Saunders, etc., et al., and Barbie, etc. we can recommend.
Criswell also
Yes.
has written a lot on methodology, but then again, like Tharusha also said, if you you might have to read in general about all the paradigms and philosophies, but then once you identify your research to be founded on a certain paradigm, you might have to read about it in more detail. And when you read about strategies of inquiries also, you will find out that certain strategies of inquiries have different paradigms. For example, if you take grounded theory, Glass and Strauss grounded theory is positivist, and Strauss and Corbin's we say positivist grounded theory. Then Kathy Kama's we say social constructivist grounded theory. So even a strategy of inquiry, if you take one strategy of inquiry, it can have variants which belong to different paradigms. So you reading about paradigms alone sometimes might not help. You might need to read about methodologies, strategies of inquiries, and then certainly there are wonderful articles, sometimes very difficult to understand when you read. In the first reading, remember Tharusha, when we first started reading Morgan and Smirkich, we might not have understood anything, but when you read a couple of times and when you read other similar, other readings, other articles on paradigms, you tend to slowly understand what those are. So yeah, there are a lot of resources available now. But I suppose for me, Creswell helped a lot because it was very simply written and I could understand it. But then I started with it and then later on read about the different paradigms in other specific books and journals.
Yeah, just a bit to add to that as well. Yeah, and in terms of the particular methodological orientation you have, also you need to read more deeply on that, because everyone can't be expert in everything. So you need to, while you may have a broad understanding of the options, whatever you're really taking forward, you need to read more deeply. So let it be quantitative or qualitative, and also the particular strategy of inquiry, and also be on the lookout for recent articles in good journals. That there are a lot of good methodological articles coming up, and also sometimes it's good to see the evolution. I mean, just reading the current one alone might not be enough, because you need to go to the roots and see how everything has begun. So certain management journals in general may be useful as well. So rather than prescribing one textbook or one article, associate with these books that we mention, and also good journals, articles in good reputed journals in your area as well. So all in all, this would help you, I guess.
Thank you so much. The next question is for Sangeeta actually. Sangeeta, the question is that if we are writing a paper targeted to a particular journal, is there any way to reach out to someone from the journal prior to the submission and receive some guidance or review to improve the paper? In the pre-submission stage itself, is reaching to the editorial board directly a good idea?
Maybe that's a question for Sangeeta.
Yeah, that's what they said, no?
Yes,
For her.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I would like to answer that question.
Yes.
For a journal, actually chief editors and editorial board. So, I mean, as editors, we can't, answer all of these questions. What you could do is there are submission guidelines. Uh, I mean, in each and every journal, you could go through those submission guidelines. You can check whether your research is in accordance with scope of the journal. Then check all the submission guidelines are addressed in a proper manner, including referencing style, everything. So then you can submit. So that should be the way forward.
I think I'll add, adding to the point that Dr. Dewasiri has made. When it comes to finding out whether your paper, you want some inputs regarding your paper pre-submission, it's never a great idea to approach the editorial board, simply because the processes are also made in such a manner that the editor has to make decisions on paper based on certain aspects. That's why you need also peer reviewers to analyze the paper and to give inputs. Not possible to receive all the papers, and then do the pre-submission work on that. One help that you can avail is if you have any confusion about whether your paper can be included, should it be submitted, in that case you can share the abstract of your paper with the editor, asking, this is what my paper is about. Do you think it is likely to be accepted? For instance, you've seen a similar paper in a special issue of that journal, and you are not entirely sure whether your paper will be accepted, or is the topic, of interest of the journal, and you want to save the time of, being rejected later. So you might want to check, but for the entire paper, we do not encourage reaching out to the editor or the editorial board.
Miss Sangeeta and Professor Dewasiri, please allow me to add a line here. Though it is like always a personal opinion between editors and editorial board members whether they like to suggest anything on the paper. Like it's all about being humanitarian sometime. Well, and for the new journals, it is really difficult, and young journals like we at SAJM, we are yet to set that standard that the kind of papers that we are publishing. When authors will see, they will not find enough content on our journal's website. Well, in that case, if you think that one is that you need to apply some basic rule of thumb from the guidelines, like you can see from the name of the journal that we are South Asian Journal of Marketing. So one is that we are catering to the geography. Second, we are catering to a specific discipline. When it comes to the kind of quality that we are looking for, kind of standard that we are going to set into the journal, sometimes it's a wise idea to reach out to one of the editor, and they may get engaged into the conversation. However, like I said, that is personal between the editor. They may reply you the back to your email, they may not. But yes, if you have a specific query, for example, are the theoretical papers getting a consideration into our journal or not, and if it is, what is that we are looking for into that theoretical paper? So if you have a specific query, genuine query, then you may reach out to one of the editor. And editor, however, like I said, that I raise my hands is totally the editor's choice whether to reply your question or not, to look at your manuscript informally or not. Some of us we do, some of us we do not. So like this is totally your choice to whom you like to reach out. But like we admire for specific questions. We do not put a lock on the gate that no, you cannot reach out to us. But something that I really do not admire is when your paper is with any editor and it's in the review process, please, you must refrain any kind of communication with the editor at this point in time, because that is being considered that when you are getting personally in touch with the editor, you are trying to influence the decision. At that stage, please do not get in touch with the editor before submission. If there is a particular specific question that which is related to the journal and you're not able to get it on the website, then for that you may reach out. I'm sorry, my colleagues, like I had put in a different opinion than what the discussion was, but some editors like me are open and humanitarian who welcome emails from different authors and happy to guide them.
That's the point, Dr. Rana. It's a really individual choice when it comes to editors responding to certain queries. The query the participant had asked is, will you do it for the entire paper? And I think the issue sometimes is that when there are people like you who go out of the way to help, the expectation of certain researchers that they will get from each and every editor, or they get disappointed when they don't hear back. You know, it's another experience that they take away. So it's a good thing that you mentioned that you should be aware that the editor may not respond to all the queries.
And just a
Yes,
thing,
and even editors like me, I also choose what to reply, what not to reply. There are a number of questions that I keep unanswered because people keep on sending me what is the indexing of the journal. Is it Scopus index? I could not find it in the Scopus. People are still reaching me out for those. I mean, I do not reply to all those questions. Yes, I find that okay, it is wise to reply. There is a intellect question inside that an editor should reply. I reply only to those questions.
Yes,
That's the reason I'm
Professor
saying that
Sudhir,
you should be
we
very
agree with
particular
you.
on what you are asking.
just a small
Absolutely.
comment. I thought, as authors, we should not get anyone should not get the wrong idea in the event that the editor says yes, you could go ahead and submit. That does not by any way means that it will be accepted or whatever, because it would go
Goes
through
to
the
the
peer
reviewer.
review process. So that has to be also very clear to when we to all who write research, do research, because otherwise you may be under the impression, well, the editor said you can submit, and be having a wrong view that that's going to get accepted, isn't it?
Disha, can we have the next question?
Yes, please. The next question is also for the editors on the group right now. They're saying, what should we do if we haven't heard back from the journal in over a month, even after writing and talking about timelines with the editor themselves?
Sometimes it takes more than a month with some journals
I think it's quite
for the first
typical to take
communication.
more, no?
Some editors are very quick and they would go through it and get back to you whether it's rejected or not. But sometimes it might take a longer, more than a month, sometimes to get the first communication from the editor, with my experience.
Yes, for a desk rejection, actually, editor can do within 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. But once the paper is in the reviewing process, that is
Yes, of
depending
course.
on the reviewer feedback. So how long will it take to receive the reviewer comments? That is the time. So there is average turnaround period. So that is depending on the reviewing process, actually.
I think one point that
You're
I
on
need
mute.
to emphasize.
Oh,
Now
sorry.
you have ways of yeah. So the one thing to remember is that you have all these details on, like for example, Emerald website. So there is a stage contact the editor. There's a stage, there's a email ID of a person you can reach out during the pre-acceptance stage if you're not entirely sure where your paper is. And post-acceptance, the paper has not been published yet. So who are you supposed to contact? So there are details. Please go through it because the editor may say yes or no to the paper, but in terms of other processes, they are not always aware on what stage the paper is in, and there are different set of people for that. So it's very important to read that information so you're reaching out to the right person.
To like I was saying that it is not wise to reach to the editor who is handling your submission. Please don't do that. And you must mind that the minimum time period given to the reviewer is 4 to 6 weeks. That's the minimum time period, and we do not even set reminders before that forcefully. And sometimes it happened that reviewers need more time. So before 3 months, please don't send any kind of communication to the editor. I'm saying it categorically. If your paper has not passed 3 months, please don't send any kind of reminder.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think we've come to the end of the time that we had fixed for this. We have a lot of unanswered questions. I'm sure, if the if the speakers are okay, I can share it with them, and we can get back to people with the questions that they had asked for. And I wanted to ask one thing. There are a lot of people who've asked for your contact details, speakers. They may want to write directly to you with questions. Please let me know if that's all right to share. And also,
The email being shared is fine with us.
Yeah,
Yes.
wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And also, I would like to, there are a lot of queries regarding certificates and, presentation. We will not be sharing the presentation given by the speakers. We will be sharing the session, recording links. That is where you can refer back to the presentations and see what has been discussed. That's one thing. Second, certificates are being sent regularly. If you have not received your certificate as of now, please write to us. We will get back to you and we will send your certificate, because for the previous 2 sessions we've already sent the certificate out, and for this third session the certificate will will be sent again in a week or 2. Wonderful. Just one second.
Yeah, Miss Disha, there was one more question that has keep on coming to our emails and WhatsApp messages. If you can just address too, there are a number of parties checking for their colleagues that whether they can join in between, or they can join the webinar series now or not. Like, this is what they're asking. They haven't registered previously, but they like
I
to join some of
understand, sir.
the webinars
We
now.
will be
So
able
there are a
to.
number of questions, and many of these questions are being put in by already the people who are already attending. So if you can
I have
just,
already responded on the WhatsApp, Dr. Rana. That's one
no,
thing.
to
Number
us
2,
you did,
for other,
but
yes, for
let other
others,
all the
I
participants
understand.
here
Yeah,
chip in.
I
So
understand. Just a minute. For other participants, it is not. We will not be able to address it or have everyone join. If there are a few, so it will be difficult for us to take a decision on who we can add and who we cannot. So yes, the registrations have actually closed for this webinar, so we should not be sharing the
Yes,
registration
of
links.
course, sir. So the maximum limit we have reached. So we can invite them for a future session. So we will
Yes.
let them know.
okay, so for now we are not inviting them.
No.
Yes.
Now I would like to invite Professor Sudhir Rana in order to deliver the keynote, the thanking note. Professor Rana, are you there? It is over to you.
Yeah. Just give me one moment. Hi everyone. At first, I was wanted to have my wonderful colleague and around Moon Haque to propose this vote of thanks, but due to some emergency, I'm proposing this thanks on his behalf. Siri, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much. So, it is my privilege to propose this vote of thanks on behalf of Publishing Management from the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka, and the session has been really inspiring and insightful. In fact, it has been really insightful, and I have learned a lot about the philosophy. It was like especially the ontology, epistemology debate has been really interesting. So that is there. I also have Professor Moon Haque here, and Professor Haque, I was just proposing this vote of thanks on your behalf. May I humbly request if you are there and you can continue with the same?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Professor.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was just like stuck in another meeting and I joined a little bit late, so I apologize. In between, I was like trying to get update from Dr. Sudhir that like what's going on. Of course, I look at the topic and I wish I could give like more time to the speakers as well as view from the audience. But towards the end, I will say that I would like to give a vote of thanks. And about me, I am the associate dean at College of Healthcare Management and Economics at Gulf Medical University. And it's been a privilege to have been proposed a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of Gulf Medical University, Emerald Publishing House, and Faculty of Management Studies of the Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka, and uh, give a hearty vote of thanks to the speakers of this occasion, Professor Arosha Adikaram and Professor Tushara Gooneratne from University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. It was indeed an inspiring and insightful session. So at the outset, I would like to express my profound gratitude to the Faculty of Management Studies of Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka, headed by Professor Atulo Ganapala. Further, I would like to express my special gratitude to Professor Aslam, Chairman, and all other members of the research and publication units of the Faculty of Management Studies for their unconditional support. I would also like to express my sense of gratitude to the regional coordinators for their kind guidance for this event and also in helping us in strengthening the various mechanisms. In particular, the support rendered by Jayantha Dewasiri, I am really grateful. He is such an active person in this research field and organizing such kind of events. Then Miss Sangeeta Menon, I'm really thankful to Miss Menon. And then Professor Sudhir Rana from, he's my colleague as well, and Professor Kashif Saeed from Gift University. I have been in touch with Professor Kashif a long time back, but I'm again fortunate enough to be in touch with him. In fact, they supported a lot in making this program a great success. Then without the gratitude, let me also thank Mrs. Disha Lakpal, regional marketing manager of Emerald Publishing Group, for their support rendering in making this event a great success. Then without a great respect, I would like to thank all the distinguished officials from Emerald Publishing, Gulf Medical University, and Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. Finally, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the audience, all the senior professors, researchers, faculty members, visiting faculty, industry participants, partner universities, representative from the media, and research students for their active participation and collaboration. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a webinar like this cannot happen overnight. It needs lots of preparation behind the wheels. The wheels started rolling not a month ago, but long time back, probably 3 months ago, when Sudhir was discussing with me about the problem, about the series of lectures that is going to be delivered. It requires planning and bird's eye view in details. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated colleagues who know their job, and I don't think we can find better person than Jayantha, Sudhir, and other relevant colleagues. So I'm extremely grateful to the members of Emerald Publishing House for their continuous support. I cannot thank everyone for their involvement and their willingness to take part on this competition. And if I miss anybody, so please take a humble gratitude from my side. And I would like to thank you all one more time. Thank you all.
So thank you everyone. Have a good day. So we will meet up again on next Thursday at 12:30. So we are going to discuss about how to develop research questions and problematization. The session is to be delivered by Professor Abhishek Bell.
Yeah.
Good day.
And applause to all the audience that you are continuously taking part into the webinar and taking advantage of it. So good job. Keep your research spirit up.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So thank you